for the exam this weekend, it does open on Friday, right at 12:01. Should be seeing that on the syllabus now. Oh, that's the wrong exam. For unit exam 2, it's the same though as well. It opens at 12:01 a.m. on Friday and then closes just before midnight on Saturday. So you have all day Friday, all day Saturday to take it. I would recommend starting it before about 9 o'clock on Saturday, just in case you have internet problems or the exam kicks you out or anything like that. The earlier you start it, the more likely we are to be able to fix that on that day. If something like that does happen, we can take the exam after that if we need to. But hopefully nothing like that does happen. And then after that, you get a little break for spring break. I forgot that spring break. It seems so early here in March, which it's March now, so that's cool. So the question paper is due on the same date, March 5th at 11:59 p.m. So that basically that midnight of Friday, March 5th is when the question paper is due. If you turn it in before that, great. I definitely recommend that so you're not cramming in a paper as well as studying at the same time. It looks like Daniela has a question. Go for it.
It's just about the test. So if like he kick us out for some reason, is there a way to go back and finish, or you just have like one time try?
If it kicks you out and it won't let you right back in, you do have the, let me make sure I tell you the right time limit for it. 90 minutes. You do have 90 minutes. Actually, the settings might be different, but it says 90 minutes there. Let me double check that I have the settings right. Might as well fix it right now while we're talking about it. So time limit 90 minutes, and then there's 70 questions for the exam. So with that, if it kicks you out while you still have time left, so if you still had half an hour and you're not able to get back in, then I will be able to see that on the stats on my end, and so I can just open it up manually for you to finish it up or entirely redo it, things like that. So you yourself, if it won't let you back in, you can't make it let you back in. It should if your internet dies and then reconnects, you should be able just to continue from where you left off. If for some reason it doesn't do that and it just keeps you kicked out, then I can reopen it manually. So just send me an email about that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So as a reminder, it is open book, it is open note. There is that time limit of 90 minutes and it's 70 questions. So you probably won't have time to look up every single answer, but hopefully you've been studying, taking notes, using some of the things that we've been learning about memory to improve your memory of the material. So when you take the exam, if you create, say, a note card or a single sheet of paper of things that you've been having trouble remembering, you'll find that in doing that, making that note card or that page of notes, you'll be able to remember those things on that page a lot easier. Then hopefully you'll get to the end of the test and you'd be like, oh, there was like these 5 questions I didn't know, and then you'd have time to look those up. So that's what I'm hoping with the time limit as well as the open note and open book. All right, any other questions about the question paper? We talked about it a little bit. It was either Tuesday or Thursday. And then I gave that video link. So is there still any questions about the question paper at all? I've seen a few people have started turning them in, so that's good. All right, we should have time on Thursday to be able to go over the study guide in depth. I think even if we don't finish all the material for the chapter, I'll probably just like stop early and spend time on Thursday going over the study guide. So we'll do that then, but I think we can jump into chapter 8 now. Unless there's any other questions, feel free to take over your mic or put them in the meeting chat as well. All right, well, let's get into chapter 8. So we're still in middle and late childhood. And chapter 8 is on the socio-emotional development. So we'll talk about emotions. We'll go into more depth in moral development. You'll see that's kind of a pattern since that's one of the areas that I do a lot of research in is moral development and pro-social behavior. So we'll dive into more depth there and go beyond what the book talks about. And then we'll also talk about peers. We'll talk about family dynamics. But we'll probably won't get to families and peers and schools until next time. But we will see how quickly we get through some of the material today. All right. So hopefully you're remembering and you can think back to what we've learned from infancy, early childhood, and now we're in middle and late childhood. So we're talking first about the self. So we've talked about how the understanding of the self, we started with things like the mirror test. When do children actually have a conception that they are a separate entity from their mother, then to the mirror test, then understanding that they have a different experience than other people. So we see that development over time, and I wouldn't necessarily call them milestones because that sounds really stage-like, but those different behaviors that we can see that evidence of the change in cognition. So at this point, the understanding of self is getting a lot more depth. So middle childhood, think anywhere from, say, 8 to 12. So imagine a child that you know in that range. So with this, so their descriptions of themselves, their understanding of themselves is going to include a lot more psychological traits rather than just concrete characteristics. That was one of the limitations, or that was one of the capacities that early children had, was to compare and see that they had maybe brown hair versus their friend had blonde hair or black hair or something like that. But now they're adding more psychological traits. So they might say things more likely, they would be more likely to say things like, I'm a helpful person, I'm a smart person, I'm a popular person, I'm nice. And with that, you can see some of the social comparison there. They're able to identify some of those psychological traits in others and can compare their own psychological traits as well. You'll see this being really important as we jump into adolescence, and these are the components that really are the building blocks of identity. So being able to compare yourself with others, notice those characteristics in yourself, notice a pattern with those. Some of those components go into the building blocks of figuring out your own identity. So we're not quite to that point yet. It's still just kind of described as the understanding of self. But if you track these over time, they're all leading to development of identity. So with this, they also have a better ability to imagine themselves in others' shoes. We've talked about this mostly from the context of empathy, but this helps a lot with social situations. Understanding that their friend is wanting this thing versus they are wanting this thing, or their friend is feeling this versus they're feeling this. Their parents want this, or their parents are stressed out, or their parents are happy. It makes social situations a lot easier, and a lot of that comes, one, from the cognitive capacity and neurological capacity to take someone else's perspective, to think outside of yourself in that abstract way, but it also comes from practice. So from seeing social situations and interactions. So yeah, especially important to positive peer relations. So with the self, one big component that we see start to arise here is self-esteem, self-efficacy, things like that. So let's define these terms and then talk about why they're important, or why they might not be important. So self-esteem is, by psychologists, it's not always used this way by lay people. Sometimes lay people, like people that aren't using scientific terminology, kind of use self-esteem and self-efficacy kind of lumped together. But for a psychologist, self-esteem is a general evaluation of the self. So a general sense of your whole self. So I like myself, or I'm happy with who I am, or I don't like myself. That would be self-esteem, your general sense of positive or negative evaluations of self. And we can see this starting to arise in middle and then especially late childhood. Self-concept is a little different. So self-concept is a domain-specific evaluation of yourself. So rather than this general, I'm happy with who I am, or I like myself, it would be something like, I'm a good student, so I'm good in this specific domain, or I'm not a good athlete, I'm not good in this specific domain. And so at this time, children are getting a lot better at figuring out and comparing themselves in these different domains to be able to say these things. So they'll be able to have maybe, these kind of self-concept descriptions. And so self-esteem is different than self-concept, but you might be able to see how they might be correlated. So if a lot of your self-concept evaluations of specific domains are positive, it's a little more likely that your self-esteem will also be high. So if you've got, I don't know, let's say a checklist of 100 domains, and 50 of those 100 are checked positive and 50 of those 100 are checked negative, well, your self-esteem might not be as high as someone who has, say, 70 of those 100 checked as positive. So they are correlated, but they're not exactly the same. All right, so self-efficacy is a really important one, and really the one that we're going to focus on, because self-efficacy is a belief that a person can master a situation or affect outcomes. So whether they think that they can produce favorable outcomes. And this really comes, as we'll discuss, it really develops by engaging and interacting and learning how to do things. So if I started today to play the ukulele, I might have a little bit of self-efficacy because I've learned to play the guitar in the past, and so they're kind of similar. So I might have a little bit of self-efficacy. Once I see myself starting to do well and improve and do better, my self-efficacy will rise. I will realize that I do have more capacity. I can master the situation. That would be me myself. Someone else might come to playing the ukulele and already feel a high sense of self-efficacy. When you have that high sense of self-efficacy, it's correlated with a lot of positive benefits, like resilience when things are challenging, like being able to overcome obstacles. Self-efficacy is also correlated with better performance in a lot of different areas. But self-efficacy itself is different than self-concept and self-esteem. So self-esteem, I know I'm going over these again, but I want them to be clear in their definition. So self-esteem, this global general evaluation. Self-concept, these domains, I'm good or bad in these specific domains. And then self-efficacy, I think I can do things. I think I can accomplish things. I think I can affect something. And it's often domain specific. So feeling like you're capable of acting in a situation. So general things that you might say are like, I think I can. You might have self-efficacy in this exam. You might be saying to yourself, I know I'll be able to do well on this exam. I really hope you all have self-efficacy going into the second exam. You've already had the first exam, you know the format. We've been talking about memory tips and techniques. So hopefully you're getting better at doing that, studying and incorporating some of that. Hopefully you have some time to be able to sit down and study so that your self-efficacy is high. Or another statement you might say is, I know I can learn this new dance, or I know I can learn how to play ukulele. So those would be things that you would say that would show that you might be high in self-efficacy. So attachments, relationships, all these things are correlated to self-efficacy, self-esteem, and self-concept. So secure attachments with parents are strongly correlated and can even have a causal impact on self-esteem and self-concept. So parents who are supportive, who give positive comments and feedback and immediate feedback and good responsive feedback to children tend to lead them to have better self-concepts or a more clear self-concept at the very least in any domain that they're working in. So if parents are able to give feedback on ukulele playing, then the child's going to get a more clear self-concept in that domain. So abuse or neglect often leads to lower self-esteem and self-concept. So not necessarily things that we're wanting. So self-esteem and self-concept without having clear feedback from someone else are oftentimes inaccurate. So both the positive and negative ones. So a positive self-esteem, so again, that really general sense of I like myself or I'm happy with myself, as well as self-concept, that domain-specific thing, those are both often really inaccurate if you're not getting immediate feedback or really clear feedback from peers, parents, teachers. This goes for adults as well, not just children, but it's definitely something that we see in middle and late childhood. But we see this in adults as well. So you might have a student who's average. Let's say we have 5 students who are average students. Let's say we can say they're exactly the same in their studiousness, student ability. Is there even a good word for that? Hopefully you get what I'm trying to say. Let's say they're all equal on that. Some of them will have an inaccurate self-concept about that and think they're a really great student. Some of them will have an inaccurate self-concept and think they're a really poor student. So oftentimes our self-concepts and our self-esteem are inaccurate. The way to make them more accurate is like direct feedback from peers, parents. That's really clear. The clarity of that feedback, having really specific examples to pull from, helps that. But more important than self-esteem and self-concept is the self-efficacy in any specific domain. But with this being said, most of the research in self-esteem is correlational. And as we've talked about in the past, correlation doesn't equal causation. So hopefully when I say that, you remember some of the examples we've given in the past. Ice cream sales and violent crime, for example, that's correlated, but there's not a causal relationship there. So self-esteem itself is a really difficult variable to manipulate. You can do things to try and increase self-esteem, but it's this general broad sense of self, and so it's oftentimes impacted by a lot of things in life. So manipulating just self-esteem in an experiment to try and make people have high self-esteem versus low self-esteem is really hard, which is why a lot of the studies are correlational, just asking, hey, what is your self-esteem, or what's your esteem of yourself, ranking from like 0 to 10 or something like that. But longitudinal studies can give us some causal data, and they do show that social support doesn't seem to increase self-esteem. It's an interesting phenomenon. We might think that having just more people around, so an additional like adding on extra social supports, might lead to more self-esteem. But in reality, when we have higher self-esteem, or when we see children with higher self-esteem, they tend to change their own social environments and more people come to them essentially. So self-esteem growing tends to lead more people to come and do more support. So the changing of self-esteem can change how much support you're receiving, but it seems, especially in longitudinal studies, is really the only way that we can see that is by seeing, oh, well, first what changed was their self-esteem, and then they got more or less social support. Versus you might generally think, well, if you get more social support, self-esteem might rise. But in longitudinal studies, we see that it happens in the opposite direction, which is really an interesting finding. So what do you think might be happening there? Why do you think some people might have, with their changes in self-esteem, also changes to the social support that they're receiving from peers, teachers, parents? Any ideas? You've got, let's say you're a teacher, you have a classroom full of children, and you notice one child's self-esteem is going up or their self-esteem seems to be declining. What would lead to more or less support? Why do you think those people would be getting changes in their social support rather than the other kids whose self-esteem is staying constant?
Probably because they have more support with their families or maybe peers that put them up. You're saying like if a teacher notice, is that?
Yeah, as one example, if a teacher noticed, yeah.
Yeah, I think like if somebody's improving themselves, it's because they're having like support and they haven't been like telling them like, oh, you're doing good, like you did great, or you're good at something. And the opposite's the same, like for something going down.
Yeah, really good comments. And that's, I think, what we often think is happening is that social support, whether they're getting extra people saying, hey, you're doing a really good job, or or hey, you didn't do very well on this, that might change self-esteem. But one thing from these longitudinal studies we see is that it kind of happens the opposite way, that self-esteem starts to change and then other people's behavior around them changes, which is funny. So I saw another hand from, I think it was Marina. It's not. Yeah, go for it.
Maybe the more vocal somebody is about how they're feeling more positive in their self-esteem, the less people around them think they need like positive comments, and they look towards the more negative comments. I guess focus on negative comments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that does tend to be a thing that humans do, is we do a really good job at focusing on negative things rather than positive. That's why there's like the golden rule in relationships of having, I think it's like seven, it's either like 5 or 7 positive interactions for 1 negative interaction or something like that. Humans are really good at looking at the negative, was my point, even though my example was poor. So, but yeah, these kinds of changes, when peers or teachers or parents see a change, is one of the big things. So we tend, as say a teacher, for example, I check grades every once in a while to see how students are doing, if students aren't turning things in. So if they're staying consistent, I don't notice that as much as if someone jumps up or jumps down. So I think it's really similar with other people around them too. So you've got a middle or late child in a classroom or in a family, and they're just kind of staying constant there. So the social input doesn't really change. But once their self-esteem goes either down or up, so whether they look like they have more self-esteem, you notice that change. And so it changes your behavior as a peer or a teacher or a parent. Once something changes, it's a little more obvious. Humans are also really good at looking for changes. So it's a little bit of a lot of what both of you are saying. So really good. It's a hard question too. Also, I might have phrased it poorly. So let's jump to self-efficacy. So I mentioned that self-efficacy in many ways is more important than self-esteem, and we'll talk about why. So low self-esteem can lead to obesity, anxiety, depression, suicide, delinquency, and lower life satisfaction. That's throughout life. That's not just in childhood. Oh, how to help a child when you notice a change. That's a really good thing. And actually, I think the information on self-efficacy will be some of the most important there, because self-efficacy is directly related to self-esteem. So hopefully this answers your question as we talk about self-efficacy. So low self-esteem itself is correlated and a causal variable in a lot of these negative outcomes. And actually, one of the best things to increase self-esteem is to achieve things. So gaining capacities and doing better at something is one of the best ways to increase self-esteem. Essentially, what you're doing is you get extra self-efficacy. So as self-efficacy rises, self-esteem is going to follow. So self-efficacy is one thing that more recently researchers have realized, I mean, recently being in like last 10 years or so, that focusing on self-esteem isn't really as useful as focusing on helping children, especially, and this applies to young adults and older adults as well, helping people achieve things and gain capacities, and then see that they are gaining capacities will increase their self-efficacy, which will then also increase their self-esteem. They'll feel better about themselves in self-concept in that specific domain, but then also positively around a lot of different things. So self-efficacy is a critical reason why students do or do not achieve. If you don't feel like you are going to be able to accomplish something, you might not even try. If you feel like you're not going to be able to learn how to do multiplication, you're not going to try as hard. It's going to be really discouraging when you do poorly. But if you see yourself working hard and slowly improving, or getting reinforcement for that improvement, or that reinforcement for trying, that's one reason why it's encouraged a lot now to reinforce people trying hard, children specifically in a school setting. So even if they get something wrong, encouraging them for trying, or trying to use the right process, or for the good parts of that they did, is building self-efficacy, which will then build self-esteem. So again, increase self-efficacy. So in answer to your question, how do you help a child when you notice a change in self-esteem? And probably you're talking about a negative decrease in self-esteem. If you notice that decrease in self-esteem, helping them achieve something. So maybe they need more support in school, some extra tutoring, or more time from you to help learn a concept, or maybe a completely different domain. They've wanted to try dance or something, and they never have, and then they start to achieve in that. They'll start to increase that self-efficacy in that domain, and then self-esteem will follow. So achieving and gaining capacities is one of the biggest ways to increase self-esteem if you notice a negative change. So, and that can be a lot of different domains, and it's really individual. So for me, maybe I have a fixed mindset around dance, but I'm a poor dancer. So if I did see increases in capacities in dancing, that probably would improve my self-esteem a little bit. But it might be also very hard. I have tried to learn dance in the past, so that if someone was trying to impact my self-esteem, maybe starting there wouldn't be the best place for me. Maybe starting somewhere where I might be able to make quicker changes and achievements might be better. So what that's going to be for any individual is going to be up to that individual. So hopefully in any child you notice a decrease in self-esteem in, you can think about, well, what domains in their life can they do really well, or do they do really well, and how can I help them do even better there? Or if it's something that they're doing kind of poorly and you think it would help them to do a lot better, focus on that. So, because either way, if you're good at something or bad at something, if you keep achieving in that thing, you're going to be building that self-efficacy. So trying multiple domains. Hopefully that gives you some good ideas, not just for other people, but this applies to yourself as well. So if you're struggling with self-esteem, building your own self-efficacy in any domain can really help your overall general view of yourself. It just kind of follows as you increase your achievement and capacity. The self-esteem will follow. Yeah, definitely. So, and this is why I'm focusing on self-efficacy more than self-esteem, because it is a really important thing that's really relevant for the rest of life. So, I mean, I said this in a couple different ways. Oh, one thing I haven't mentioned specifically, the word scaffolding in this. So a big part of helping people achieve is using that zone of proximal development that we've learned. So people are capable of a certain amount of maybe dance skills. My dance skills are probably really, really small, but with help, maybe I can do a little bit more, right? So, or maybe with playing ukulele, maybe my capacity of what I can do is like this big, and then what I can do with some help, maybe an app or a teacher or something like that, is a lot bigger. So helping scaffold a middle or late child, or even an adolescent, young adult, late adult, helping build capacities is really good. This can be a new hobby. This can be something that they already like to do. It can be something completely new, or something that they struggle with even. So that scaffolding is really important. Self-efficacy is often really domain specific. I think I've mentioned that. So saying something like, I know I can learn how to ride a bike would be an example of self-efficacy. My daughter, for example, she still hasn't learned how to ride a bike very well, but because she doesn't have a lot of self-efficacy for it. I try to work on it, but she doesn't want to practice, so it's really hard. I'm not going to just force her to ride a bike. But she really likes to scooter. She thinks she can do that. She has high self-efficacy, and she's gotten a lot better at scootering. Here is a funny, relevant video that I just wanted to share about that really shows self-efficacy and how this achievement can lead to an overall general positive sense of self.
What do you got, any words of wisdom? What about for all the other kids trying to learn how to ride their bike? Can you say anything to them? Give me some thumbs up.
So hopefully, I think that might be the first time I've shown that video through the microphone and speaker. I'm not sure how well the auto tune comes through, but hopefully you heard it. The kid definitely was very happy that he had learned how to ride a bike. He achieved something. So they were very, very happy that they learned that and felt really good about it. So hopefully that helps show, like, achieving things helps people's self-esteem go up. And it's a cute example. Any excuse to watch that video, I think, is a good excuse. So with this, self-regulation is also increasing in middle and late childhood as well. So that can help as well with self-efficacy, with managing disappointment, for example, being more resilient, that kind of thing. So let's jump to some emotions. So as children are aging, as they're getting into middle childhood, especially into late childhood, their understanding of emotions improves dramatically. A lot of this is coming just from interactions with people. So they are able to see more situations where anger exists, maybe where it might be appropriate, maybe when it's used inappropriately, joy, fear, all sorts of emotions in a lot of different contexts. So as they get that, and as they're able to understand and kind of take perspective of other people, their understanding of emotions is going to dramatically improve. So mental time travel appears as well. So it sounds a lot cooler than it is. It's a really important skill though. So looking forward to emotions they might have. So, oh, I know my birthday is coming up. If my friend is able to come, I'm going to be so excited. But if my friend's not able to come to my party, I'm going to be really disappointed. And also looking back to emotions that they may have had. So when it rained and we weren't able to go on our hike, I was really sad or disappointed. So that kind of capacity we start to be able to see. So with that, they also are starting to understand that more than one emotion can occur in any given situation. This can be learned earlier than this, the fact that you can be both happy as well as scared or nervous at the same time, for example, that you can have more than one emotion and they can all kind of mix together into more complex emotions. This can be learned earlier with direct training or more experience, but it generally on average appears in about middle and late childhood for people. So it can be trained earlier. There were 5-year-old clients that we were working on with recognizing emotions that we would start working on understanding multiple emotions in any given situation. We would be out in the community. Oftentimes we would go places like a video game shop, one, because they like video games, and two, because they also had like demos of games. And so you would be able to see people be upset or excited. So being able to ask them, hey, how's that person feeling, to help them understand. So you can train that earlier, but just on average, naturally, this is about when it appears. So also, they are better at seeing what their own emotional state is and recognizing and understanding their emotions and pinpointing the cause of their emotion. So they might be sad because a friend's not in school today. They'll be able to pinpoint that a lot better versus an early child. They will have an emotion, and you as an outside observer, maybe a parent or a teacher or a babysitter or an aunt or an uncle, someone might be able to know, oh, it's because their toy just broke or something like that. But in early childhood, they're not able to grasp the direct cause and effect that this is causing them that emotion. So this is appearing in through middle and late childhood. So by the end of late childhood, they should be really good at that. So also, suppression and concealing emotions improves as well, because these are things that we do in general social situations. So, for example, in any given situation, it might be beneficial socially to not be displaying any given emotion. You might be really upset that someone did something, but if you want to keep that relationship going in the future, you might conceal or suppress that emotion in that given situation, as an example. Versus if you displayed your emotion, it might make them react a certain way, that bidirectional interaction. So children are getting better at this and realizing that if they display a different emotion, it can lead to different social consequences in their environment around them. So that was the example I just gave. Yeah. So with this, they're also learning other abilities to soothe themselves, distract themselves, coping strategies. Just the other day, my daughter was like, "Dad, take a breath." So that's one of the coping strategies that I encourage her to use. So she encouraged me to use it. Forget what was happening. Um, I did take a breath, so that was good. It was a helpful reminder. Um, yeah, I don't remember what I was frustrated about now. It doesn't matter. Anyway, they're doing a lot better in through middle and late childhood at being able to do that, at soothe themselves. So this is one thing going back to infancy, and we talked about how doing cry it out method, for example, doesn't actually teach a child to soothe themselves. It just makes that behavior of crying extinct, but their anxiety levels are still up. It's not till closer to middle and late childhood that children are able to do a really good job at addressing and controlling and suppressing and regulating their own emotions. So a lot of times, well, we might expect even younger children, like say my 4-year-old, to do a better job regulating emotion, where they still need a lot of support in early childhood. Then in middle childhood, still reminders, training, and support, but by late childhood, they should be a lot more capable of doing that. Some of that capacity might appear to go away in adolescence of regulating emotions, but we'll talk about why that is. Mainly it's because they're feeling the emotions like at a higher level, like it's stronger, more intense to them now, so they don't have practice regulating that intensity of emotion, is essentially why it seems like in adolescence some of this regulation ability might kind of disappear. But we're getting ahead of ourselves with that. So hopefully you can see that the care and immediate responding to infants and then early children really helps their body recognize what's supposed to happen here, encouraging and training them. Like we did train in clinical settings one-on-one for 3 or 4 or 5-year-olds. We tried to teach them things like taking deep breaths, doing other skills, doing tapping, like focusing on something else, distracting themselves, or just we would distract them as well. So when I say tapping, it's just you're focusing on your hands, you're moving them up and down slowly, like intentionally, to one, distract yourself, and two, to be able to take breaths too. So this is where we also start to see the capacity for genuine empathy. So we've talked about the perspective taking, that as that starts, that empathy is that two pieces: feeling what others are feeling and being able to take their perspective. It's not until middle childhood that children have the full capacity to feel the entire construct of empathy, which is, it's good to know how it develops up to that point. But now they have that full cognitive capacity to understand and take another's perspective, see that that person might be feeling multiple emotions in any given situation, that kind of thing. So how is this relevant in schools? Well, we've done a lot of work on socio-emotional learning. There's a lot of focus on socio-emotional learning in schools and a lot of specific programs. So let's watch this little video on socio-emotional learning to give you a little bit more. We've actually shown a couple videos that I would say are socio-emotional learning videos in this class, but this will give kind of an overview of what is SEL, what is socio-emotional learning, and then why it's important, as it says in the title there.
There's a lot of talk these days about SEL, social emotional learning. But what exactly is it? Social emotional learning is the process of learning social and emotional skills, and it's just as important as learning reading or math. This learning process is most effective when it begins early and continues through high school. Social emotional skills are essential for success in school, work.
I'm actually going to make a change there. They say it's important early and then through high school. Really, it's important through life. But most of the research done is in between elementary school and high school, because it's just an easier context to test things out with kids. You come to us as a researcher, you have an SEL program you want to test out, or a new thing. You might have a specific age group that you're thinking of it being good for. So oftentimes you come to a school, especially schools in poorer areas will get a lot of new kinds of programs tested because the researchers will come in and they'll be like, hey, we'll give you a little bit of our grant money and we'll spend some time with your kids. We'll try to build these skills with them. So mostly it's, my main point is there's a lot of aspects of that we could discuss methodology wise, but my main point here is that oftentimes we're only testing kids in between elementary school and high school because it's an easier population to access in a public school. Accessing things like private schools or kids in homeschool is a lot more difficult, but since it's a public school, it's easier to access. It's harder to access kids in, well, kids, adolescents and adults in college settings to do socio-emotional learning programs, but they do exist. There are socio-emotional learning programs done in colleges as well as in business settings. So for adults in the workforce too. But most of the work that we've done is in elementary through high school. But that's not to say it's not important your entire life as well.
Social emotional skills are essential for success in school, work, and life. With SEL, students learn to manage their own emotions and behaviors, have empathy and show care and concern for others, solve problems effectively, make responsible decisions, and maintain healthy relationships. Students learn to recognize what's happening inside them and to be aware of their emotions, which helps them deal with strong emotions and impulsive behaviors. It helps them stop, take a breath, and think about a situation before acting. Students learn to identify others' emotions and perspectives, which helps them empathize and show compassion, no matter who they are or what their background is. It's not difficult to imagine how this is important in the classroom and in life. Students learn to solve problems in peaceful ways and communicate assertively about what they need or want. This helps them get along with other students and get the help they need from adults. When students learn to make responsible decisions about their lives and their future, things can turn out better. Research shows social emotional learning makes a difference. Students who participate in SEL do better academically, have improved attitudes and behaviors, and act in delinquent or disruptive ways less often. In the United States, students with strong social emotional competence are twice as likely to earn a college degree and nearly 50% more likely to graduate from high school and have a full-time job by age 25. Just as important, students who are socially and emotionally competent have more friends. This means they're more likely to feel connected to school and do well, and less likely to be left out or bullied. Simply put, by participating in social emotional learning, students learn the skills to succeed in every facet of school and the rest of their lives.
So hopefully that gave you some examples of what socio-emotional learning is doing in schools, and the program that you're going to have for a early child versus middle versus late versus adolescent child is they're going to be very different. They should be age appropriate. You're probably not going to be using the same programs, techniques, classes, activities in elementary school as you are in a high school. So you might be able to, it might still be fun in high school to play, say, a game and then practice sharing, but it's not necessarily as relevant as a skill you should be learning in elementary school. So there are a lot of socio-emotional learning programs. Not all of them are good. So let's talk about some that are some aspects to look for to see which ones are good and which ones are not. So with this, they do exist to kind of support well, here are the 5 key components that they're trying to work on for socio-emotional learning: self-management, social awareness, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and self-awareness. So if you think about that in the context of an early child, so they're running around with peers, they're playing at recess, in the classroom, they're trying to learn to sit and listen as well as do new skills. So being aware of when they're maybe frustrated or overwhelmed, managing themselves, being able to maybe if you're talking about first grade or kindergarten, maybe they're able to use the restroom on their own and go by themselves. Social awareness, aware when their friends are upset or not, or when they need to be quiet in this setting. Responsible decision making, so being responsible for their own work that they're bringing to school, and relationship skills. So when to share, or how to be nice to each other. So that might be some of the things you might be looking at in early childhood, maybe first or second grade. If we think about that from a high school perspective, you've got, say, a junior or senior. These are all very different things that you're going, well, some of it's similar. You're building on these skills, obviously. You should still be aware of what other people around you are feeling and whatnot. But when we're talking about relationship skills in high school setting, we might be talking as well about friend groups and dating relationships. You might be responsible decision making in driving cars, or drug use or sexual behaviors, so making responsible sexual decisions. Self-management of emotions is going to be a lot higher than, and also self-management of maybe money as well. So there's other components that this is connected to throughout the lifespan that are really important. So with that, some of these, you might hear the term character education program. Working in the field for so long, there are different definitions for socio-emotional learning as well as character education. We'll talk about those now. But the techniques, the tools, the actual practices that they do often overlap so much that, at least in my view, I don't care about the difference between socio-emotional learning and character education. Oftentimes they end up being the same. But CASEL is one example of an organization that, one, collects research on different socio-emotional learning and character education programs. And so these are the focuses of CASEL. And CASEL is an acronym, and I think I've got what it stands for on the next slide. Or maybe we can just go to their website, and it should say what CASEL's acronym is. Okay, I think this is what it is. Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. Collaborative for Academic, Social, Emotional Learning. Yep, that's what it is. So CASEL does a really good job at collecting research of not just their researchers. They do have researchers, they do have practitioners on staff, but they collect a lot of research from other people. So if I published a paper about a new socio-emotional learning program, hopefully their researchers would be able to see that and combine that with the things that they've done in the past. So this might be a good place to go if you wanted to look for research around socio-emotional learning. So go to this research page, and you can click here. You can go to specific. They do a good job at putting it in ways that's pretty understandable, but they also have links to actual research. So you can go here. Here's their own summary report. Some of these are going to link to like full text research articles. I'm hoping one of these that I click is going to be one of those. But you can find that here as well. Probably their collaborator research is going to be more of those full text articles. But just one good source to go to if you're interested in any kind of socio-emotional learning program or character education program. They do a really good job at collecting the evaluations and the research so people can see it. So if you're a teacher or you're a parent, you can come here and say, hey, is this good? Maybe you're a parent and you want more socio-emotional learning in your child's school. So you could come here and see, well, what works? Maybe here's a couple good programs and what's good at different ages as well. They've got a couple different papers that talk about that. This one works best for these ages versus these ages versus these ages. And then also some that are bad. So maybe you find here that the one that's being implemented in your school is not as effective, or maybe not effective at all. So that could be useful to know as well. All right, so just one source. There's others. It is a pretty good one, but also doing the same thing you're doing with your question papers, looking up socio-emotional learning. We haven't really talked about meta-analyses, but a meta-analysis basically takes a lot of the different studies together statistically and finds overall in the last 7, 10, 20 years, what is the actual effect of this specific kind of socio-emotional learning program? That's what a meta-analysis would do. They're really good. Honestly, reading the abstract, intro, and discussion would still be really relevant for you, but I would ignore the methods and results of those. All right, so actually, this is probably a good time to take a little break, especially since my mind just went so far off on different tangents, because this is an area I know a lot about. And so sometimes I'm bringing in things that's not necessarily relevant for you or your test, but hopefully useful for you in life. So let's take a quick break. Let's be back at 9:26, and we'll continue talking about middle and late childhood socio-emotional learning and social skills. All right, and we are back. Looks like everything is still running as it should. If you can't hear me, obviously you can't hear me ask this, but let me know if my mouth is moving and you can't hear me. All right, so stress and anxiety specifically. So at this point, it is really effective to teach children stress coping strategies. So any different strategies are useful. So problem solving can be really good too. So what is the stress coming from? Is it from having too much homework? Well, we talked about that last time. They probably shouldn't be having a bunch of homework. Is the stress coming from drama with friends? Well, helping them figure out and problem solve. So being there to support and help a child work through. They're a lot more capable at this time of learning and using these kinds of coping strategies. Meditation can be useful. Basically anything you can think that would be useful for reducing anxiety could be useful for a middle or late child. So let's talk about resilience specifically. I've mentioned it a couple times. So resilience is, I mean, the idea of resilience has been around a while, but it's been a really important aspect or a really big aspect of research recently. And we'll talk about why after we watch this video.
Be talking about the topic of toxic stress in our children. And we all know that kids undergo a lot of different types of stress, anything from taking a big test, moving, to things more serious like parents getting divorced or having a serious injury. So how do we help kids deal with that stress? Stress can actually be positive. It can actually motivate kids, for example, to study harder for that test. But it can also have really negative repercussions too. It can lead to kids becoming depressed, even suicidal in the worst cases. It can lead to kids not taking good care of their bodies or making the wrong types of choices, like abusing drugs or alcohol. And we obviously don't want to get to that point. So if we see our kids starting to get stressed, one of the big things we can do is promote what's called resilience. Resilience is how kids deal with that stress. And there are a lot of different ways that we can promote resilience in our kids. One of them is just by having supportive, positive adults in their lives. So parents, teachers, relatives, friends, really talking to kids, validating their feelings, and just being a support person. The more support people that kids have in their lives has been shown to help reduce that toxic stress and the bad side effects from it. If you think that your kid is needing some additional help, having a professional to talk to can also be of assistance, such as a psychologist like we have here at Children's, social worker, school counselor. Those can also help build up that resilience in kids. Also promoting positive, healthy activities in kids, such as sports, extracurricular activities, or just getting outside. All of those can promote resilience, which can help combat the toxic stress.
So that's one I didn't remember to mention, is physical activity in general is one of the best ways to decrease anxiety and manage stress. Kids should be pretty active at this time in life. Anyway, we've talked about that. Having, what was the recommendation? I think it was 2 hours for early childhood a day, and then I think it was 1 hour in middle and late childhood. Jump back to the chapter 7 material to make sure that I'm not telling you wrong there. But generally, a little extra activity is probably not going to be a negative thing. So, but building resilience is a construct that, honestly, the definition and the research around it is still kind of, there's disagreements there. There are with a lot of constructs. The more it's kind of that that knowledge of a thing. I've realized, like, as I've learned more about all these different constructs, that there's a lot more disagreement among psychologists about definitions, like really minute little things, than I ever realized. So like the simple definition they put in a textbook, there's going to be some researchers in that area that are going to be like, nope, I don't like that definition. Or I don't like this specific, it'll probably be, I don't like this specific aspect of this definition. These couple words don't fit the construct. So it's kind of frustrating, but it's also good to know more and learn more. And it does drive the field in that way. Anyway, with resilience is kind of a collection of capacities. So if you have emotion regulation skills, if you have additional people around you, if you have genetic tendencies to handle stress and anxiety a little better, if you are also active outside, your resilience will probably be higher. You'll be able to bounce back from any kind of challenge or stress, whether it's a fight with friends, failing a test, parents getting divorced, whatever it is. These things together are related to resilience. So if you say someone has high resilience, if you want someone to have higher resilience, you're not really working on resilience itself. You'd be working on specific skills and capacities or techniques for that person, so their resilience also rises. So getting them more support systems, getting them a therapist, giving them more techniques to manage that stress. Those two things together would probably increase resilience. So resilience is kind of this umbrella term of how well are we bouncing back? How well is this middle or late child bouncing back from problems, stresses, anxieties, things like that. So, but there's a lot of research on it. Now it's I'd say one of the most popular areas of research is resilience, especially right now during the pandemic. I've seen a lot more just general people using the term, even just using the term resilience. So it's a really useful one to be looking into and doing research on as well. If it's of interest to you, maybe a good topic for a question paper, or if you want to go into research in the future or teaching skills, figuring out what skills to teach for resilience. You can definitely do that. Castle, that website might be a good place to start with that. APA website as well. All right, so moral development. So we'll go through this pretty quickly. I feel like each time we talk about moral development, I talk about more than I intend to. So I've covered a lot of this already. But let's look at these levels of moral development in specific. So step 1, step 2, step 3, 4, 5, 6. Kohlberg thought that people were developing their moral capacities and their moral reasoning specifically in these kinds of stages. Now we realize that actually a lot of people, their moral reasoning is right around here, 4, sometimes 5. That even people that we see as moral exemplars, that if you ask a community, hey, who is the most moral person in your community, or who's the most moral person in your church, who's the most moral friend that you know that does the most moral things, even those people that lots of people agree this is like the moral exemplar, their reasoning level usually is around here, step 4, sometimes step 5, even though Kohlberg thought step 6 was like the pinnacle of moral reasoning cognitively. So in and of itself, these reasoning levels, we do see children in early childhood, we've talked about this, focusing on punishment and obeying rules to avoid punishment. We've talked about conforming to get rewards. We've talked about that focus on self being not a selfish thing, but this is just cognitively what they're capable of. And then stage 3, trying to get approval from people around you. Basically, after stage 3, the rest of these step 4, 5, and 6 are used by a lot of different people. You can use individual principles of your own conscience to determine the morality of any situation, to reason about a situation. But then in another situation, you're presented with a different situation, you might use this. You might conform to the authority or the law. You might go back to the law. Usually that's what we're talking about there. Is law. So Kohlberg thought that people would move up in this reasoning as they age, and we do see step 1, 2, 3. That's pretty consistent. But once you get to step 4, 5, and 6, that's kind of the next level of capacity that people have. In some situations, they will not rationalize, reason. I just used the word a minute ago. They'll reason at stage 6 versus a stage 4. And so Kohlberg also, the way they were described, kind of seemed to favor the step 5 and 6 levels of reasoning, which is interesting considering most moral exemplars that Kohlberg would have said are moral exemplars and the community says are moral exemplars really aren't using step 6 moral reasoning as much. So having it in that hierarchy is probably not a really useful model, but there it is. So probably said more than I was intending to say there. Anyway, so with this, also Kohlberg ignored a lot of moral behavior. So if you say someone has moral ideals, you could think of maybe a philosopher who just never actually acts or behaves. Just it's not actually what you usually see, but just that kind of stereotype of someone who has these moral thoughts but never actually acts on anything. So Kohlberg was in that way. His research and theories ignored moral behaviors or pro-social behaviors, values, moral emotions. It was all about that cognition and reasoning. So our understanding of moral development cognitively includes a lot of other pieces. moral emotions, which is one of the biggest pieces we've talked about before, so we won't go into depth here. Guilt, empathy, a lot of different moral emotions exist. Just look up a research article. There's actually a really good one that I think would be pretty understandable for everybody. If you're interested in moral emotions, what's his first name? It's David Haight or Haight, Haight. Might be mixing some letters around there. Wrote a good paper on moral emotions, basically listing them all out, what their correlates are, what causes each of them, what they lead people to do. So if you want more information on moral emotions, do that. Moral values are the beliefs and attitudes about the way we think things should be. So your moral values might be a little different than someone else's moral values, even a sibling's moral values. But the moral emotions oftentimes lead to a foundation for those moral values. So the things that you feel from other people, that you've experienced in your life over time, essentially by about middle and late childhood, these moral emotions, seeing different social situations, seeing people share versus steal versus be fair or unfair, will start to develop your beliefs and attitudes about the way things should be. So people should do X, people should do Y. That's what moral values are. And they work within context. So in a school context, maybe your moral value is that you shouldn't share your answers with your friends, versus another person's moral value might be, well, we should be helping. So even if it's a test, maybe their moral value says, well, maybe I should be helping. There might be reasoning in that, Kohlberg level reasoning to it as well. But interestingly, a lot of our morality, a lot of our moral behaviors are kind of developed habits over time. So, so moral reasoning, we talked about that with Kohlberg. A lot of the neurological development leads to that stage 1, 2, 3, and then up to 4, 5, 6 jump. So once you get past 3, about your neural capacity is at the level where you can reason at level 6, level 5, or level 4. So reinforcement or modeling from adults for specific kinds of reasoning, actually doing dilemmas, stopping a movie, a Disney movie in the middle. I don't know why this one came to my mind, but it's not a bad one. So you could be watching, say, Fox and the Hound. So where the puppy and the baby fox, I think baby foxes are kits. So the puppy and the kit become friends, but then when they grow older, the dog is supposed to hunt the fox. So you could pause the video and talk to your kids about it and be like, hey, what do you think the dog should do? What is the proper thing the fox should do in this moral dilemma they have now of kind of being on opposite sides? So those are kinds of things that can help children increase their moral reasoning. Reading books. I'm surprised how often we can talk about moral reasoning when I'm reading Calvin and Hobbes to my daughter. Calvin and Hobbes is great for that. Sorry. So another aspect that we'll see come more into play in adolescence. So I think we'll wait to focus on moral identity to adolescence. But a moral identity is one type of identity a person can have. They can see themselves as a moral person. So Superman, for example, tends to see themselves as a moral person, and that's part of their identity. A person can, as they're developing their identity of themselves, they can see themselves as a moral person. So not everybody has a moral identity. Not everybody has to have a moral identity, but it is one component of moral development that can occur. So, but we'll talk about it more when we get to actual identity. So when we're talking about moral character, these are the personality. You could say this is like moral personality. Early research kind of used it the same way. So it should be the tendency to act certain ways, kind of like personality traits. If you say someone's extroverted, you might expect them to act in an extroverted way across different contexts. With more recent personality research, we realize it's a lot more domain specific or context specific. You might be really outgoing in a social situation, but not at all in a classroom situation, as an example, or vice versa. Maybe you're really outgoing in a classroom setting, but not at all in, say, a group of new people in a party kind of setting. So, but that's what moral character is about. It's about those kinds of unique, enduring ways. So you would say a person is their stable disposition. So you might say someone's an honest person. That'd be an example of a moral characteristic. Or someone is loyal to other people, or someone's respectful or responsible. Those are examples of moral characteristics that you would expect. It's not always true, but that you would expect to be consistent across situations. So that's a good video if you're interested in this in more detail, but just trying to breeze through this because we've talked about some of these aspects. So when we're talking about moral behavior, again, it's that definition thing. So depending on which researcher you ask, moral behavior encompasses pro-social behavior versus another researcher will say they're slightly different constructs. That's fine. Basically anything pro-social is also moral, no matter what researcher you're talking to, but not every single moral behavior might be pro-social. As a quick dilemma there. So what are some examples you can think of just pro-social behaviors that, let's talk specifically about middle and late children might display? What are some pro-social things that a middle or late childhood might be doing and actually engaging in? Feel free to put it in the meeting chat or just take over the mic as well. That's a good example. So inviting someone to eat lunch with them at school, that's definitely some kind of pro-social behavior that you might see in a school setting. So when we're saying pro-social, it's pro-society or pro-others. It's to that other and trying to build that group as well. So a really good example there. Any other examples? All right, well, think about it. Think about what other examples of pro-social behavior you might see here. I mean, there's simple ones like sharing, obviously, asking to join a group, eating lunch, or play on a team. Oh, here's another example, really relevant for right now. Shoveling snow for people. So maybe neighbors or people around you, friends, or maybe your grandparents. So doing that with a child, that's a really good example of a pro-social behavior, modeling that. That'll help instill that kind of pro-social behavior in children especially too. So really good examples there. All right, feel free to put any others that you think of as we keep going with the slide. So essentially moral behaviors develop in the same way as any other behaviors. So you get behaviorism, which you can have things reinforced. So, oh, here's another good example. So cooperating with other classmates. So whether it's working on a project together, that's building and that's pro-social, it's pro other people around you, or maybe it's working on a problem, maybe it's there's disagreements in a classroom and you cooperate with each other to figure things out. So yeah, that's a really good example as well. So to learn these behaviors, we can do it a lot of different ways. Reinforcement or punishment, so reinforcing the pro-social behaviors. If a child says, if the children are cooperating, maybe the teacher reinforces that behavior. Sociocognitive models, so doing the things, doing snow shoveling, for example, using the zone of proximal development, seeing the parents be consistent in their behavior, being warm about it. So you can see how that can also bring in some of that behaviorism as well. And bioecological systems, so what things are capable in the context they're in. In the school, what is the school's culture around bullying? The school might have an anti-bullying policy or like say nobody should be bullying at all. But if bullying is allowed, why is that still there? So if bullying is actually allowed and not punished, and maybe bullies get things that they want, then it might be teaching kids using a term called hidden curriculum that bullying is acceptable. So what is the context telling them? What is available for them to do in that context? So with this, on average, pro-social behaviors increase across childhood and through adolescence. So focusing on talking about what other people need, being a good model of pro-social behavior, and service projects within a classroom or a community. So when we get to adolescence, we'll talk about how a lot of senior projects, for example, do that kind of service to the community. So at different high schools that I've worked in, they had kids doing things like working in parks or working at vets' offices and things like that, service to the community. Getting that started earlier on is really useful. With this, a lot of research on development, on socio-emotional learning, focuses on problems. So why are kids so angry, or why are kids so anxious? Why are kids having bad behaviors? Why are they being delinquent? A lot of research starts off with those kinds of questions. And so we have a lot more answers on why do these kinds of bad things happen, or why are these negative outcomes happening? There's not as much research in general on things like moral development, pro-social behavior, moral reasoning, but we see that from socio-emotional learning, when we do that kind of research, we see improvements in some of those problem behaviors. We see grades go up, we see behaviors, delinquent behaviors go down, things like that. So focusing on building positives is also important. That's kind of one of the perspectives that positive psychologists come from in general is, hey, rather than only focusing on the negatives and trying to fix the negatives, let's research the positive things of life. How do these positives happen? Let's build these positives. And we see that it also, at the same time, decreases the negatives, which is really useful. So researching the whole human experience, and positive psychology says, hey, we're kind of ignoring this sliver or this whole big bubble of positive human experience and context. With that, the last point on moral development I want to point out is this second paragraph. So a lot of moral behavior that a middle child or a late child or an adolescent or an adult or late adult, a lot of our moral behavior isn't actually reasoned out moment by moment. A lot of our moral behavior is actually instinctual habits that we've built and reinforced over time. So a child that has been inviting people to eat with them at lunch, that has been shoveling snow for others, that has been cooperative, when they come to a new situation, they will probably default to those same behaviors, those same processes, and you can imagine this neurologically. That's what their brain does. That's their neurological habit to act in a pro-social manner. So that's one thing that in my work I try to build and encourage people to do, is build that kind of pro-social habit. So that'll improve a lot of things in people's lives. So with that being said, you can stop whatever habitual action you have in any given moment, think about it and reason it out, especially if it's a really, really strange or different situation, you might do that. But usually that reasoning happens after a situation. You might look back to it and say, oh, you know, I probably should have done X, Y, Z, that would have been better. And then you incorporate that to your next future behaviors. So most of our moral behaviors generally really instinctual. Kind of we have pre-programmed our own moral behavior over the course of our lives. So it's not like some outside force doing it. In some cases it is like, what does the school say about bullying, that kind of thing. But most of it is our own experiences over time have programmed us to act in a specific moral or immoral or pro-social or less pro-social way. So that's the big thing that I wanted to get at with moral development specifically. So we will talk about emotions, socio-emotional differences, and get to family next time that we come back. So thanks for being here today. If you have any questions, we will definitely have time for talking about the exam and going over the study guide, but feel free to send me an email with questions that you have on the study guide so I can know to focus on those first thing when we get to the study guide next time. So thanks very much. Have a good day.